The flight attendant strolled through the cabin, her practiced smile as fixed as the shine on her neatly pressed uniform. Passengers bustled around, some stowing bags in the overhead compartments, others settling into their seats with magazines or headphones. Everything seemed normal, a routine flight on a bright, sunny afternoon. Yet, something in the air felt off. Perhaps it was the way her eyes darted momentarily toward a particular passenger, a tall black soldier in crisp military attire, seated in the economy section. Her gaze lingered for just a fraction too long before she returned to her rehearsed cheerfulness, her movements almost too deliberate as she continued her duties. The soldier, Sergeant Marcus Hale, sat calmly, thumbing through an old paperback novel. The book seemed almost out of place amidst the glossy tablets and smartphones around him, its well-worn pages hinting at a love for something tangible in a world full of screens. His uniform bore medals that whispered stories of valor, but his demeanor spoke only of quiet humility. He was accustomed to blending into the background despite standing out, an invisible hero in a world quick to forget. As the boarding process neared completion, a slight commotion broke the monotony. A passenger in first class had spilled coffee, prompting the flight attendant to rush forward with napkins and apologies. It was during this distraction that another attendant approached Marcus, her tone brisk and official. "Sir, are you certain you're in the correct seat? This section is economy." Marcus finished for her, his tone steady, his eyes meeting hers without wavering. "That's what my ticket says." Her lips pursed slightly before she forced a smile. "Of course. Enjoy your flight." But as she walked away, there was something unspoken in her expression. A flicker of discomfort, perhaps even disdain. Moments later, the announcement came, a request for passengers with executive tickets to ensure their boarding passes were clearly displayed. Though the message was general, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that it was aimed squarely at him. Nearby, an older woman leaned over to her companion, whispering just loud enough for Marcus to catch fragments of the conversation. "I just don't understand. Why would someone like him?" The rest was lost, but the implication hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. It wasn't long before the flight attendant returned, her smile now tinged with a patronizing edge. "Excuse me, Sergeant Hale. It seems there's been a mix-up. Your name came up on our system as having an upgrade to an executive seat." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his instincts flaring. "I didn't request an upgrade." "It's complimentary," she replied, the smile growing tighter. "A gesture of appreciation for your service." The soldier hesitated. Something about this didn't feel right, but before he could respond, the attendant added, "If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your seat." Reluctantly, Marcus stood, his movements deliberate and measured. As he followed her toward the front of the plane, the eyes of other passengers followed him, their gazes heavy with curiosity, judgment, or something more sinister. When they reached the executive cabin, the attendant gestured to a seat near the window, but as Marcus prepared to sit, she stopped him with a subtle shake of her head. "I'm sorry, Surgeon, but that seat's unavailable. This way, please." Confusion flickered across Marcus's face, but he complied, following her farther down the aisle. Finally, she stopped at a seat in a less favorable spot, near the restroom and well away from the spacious legroom of the others. "Here you are," she said, her tone devoid of the earlier warmth. Marcus settled into the seat, his jaw tightening slightly. He wasn't one to complain, but the subtle slight hadn't gone unnoticed. As he adjusted himself, he caught a glimpse of the attendant walking away, her posture rigid, her steps hurried. Something was definitely wrong. The flight took off smoothly, the hum of the engines blending with the murmurs of conversation and the rustling of in-flight magazines. Yet Marcus couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease. Every glance, every whispered word seemed to carry a weight beyond the surface. Then came the note. The flight attendant returned, her face a careful mask of professionalism, as she handed Marcus a folded piece of paper. "From the captain," she said simply before disappearing down the aisle. Marcus unfolded the note, his eyes scanning the words. His expression hardened, his fingers tightening around the paper. Whatever he had just read, it wasn't what anyone would expect from a routine flight. For a moment, Marcus stared out the window, the clouds below stretching endlessly. The note lay in his lap, its cryptic message a stark contrast to the peaceful scene outside. And though he appeared calm, his mind was anything but. Something had been set in motion, and Marcus Hale was now at the center of it. The flight settled into a deceptive calm, passengers engrossed in their books, movies, or conversations. But for Sergeant Marcus Hale, there was no such distraction. The note still rested in his hand, its cryptic message gnawing at his thoughts. It was written in block letters, as if to mask the handwriting. Asterisk not every thing is as it seems. Stay, alert. Asterisk. Marcus glanced around the cabin, searching for any sign of who might have sent it. The flight attendant who delivered it had vanished into the galley. Other passengers seemed oblivious, lost in their own worlds. But then his gaze caught something unusual. A man in a suit, seated a few rows ahead, peering at him from over the edge of a newspaper. When their eyes met, the man quickly turned away. Marcus tucked the note into his pocket, his military instincts kicking in. He had been trained to assess threats, to decipher the hidden motives behind seemingly innocuous actions. But this was something new. He needed more information. The first opportunity came when the flight attendant returned, her expression guarded. "Would you care for a drink, Sergeant Hale?" she asked, her tone as polite as ever. "No, thank you," Marcus replied, watching her closely. "But I do have a question. That note, did the captain really send it?" For the briefest moment, her mask slipped. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face before she recovered. "I'm afraid I wouldn't know, sir. I was just asked to deliver it." Her words felt rehearsed, too carefully neutral. Before Marcus could press further, she excused herself and moved to the next passenger. The soldier leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. Was she lying? And if so, why? The flight dragged on, the sense of unease growing heavier with each passing minute. Marcus began to notice patterns, small, seemingly unrelated details that didn't quite add up. The man with the newspaper kept glancing his way, as did a woman across the aisle who was pretending to scroll through her phone. A pair of attendants whispered furtively near the galley, their eyes darting toward him before they quickly dispersed. Marcus decided to test the waters. He rose from his seat and made his way to the restroom, moving deliberately slow to observe the reactions around him. Sure enough, the man in the suit folded his newspaper and stood, casually following a few steps behind. Marcus locked the restroom door, his mind racing. Who were these people, and what did they want from him? The answer came sooner than expected. As he exited the restroom, the man in the suit was waiting nearby, leaning against the wall with a calculated nonchalance. "Sergeant Hale," he said, his voice low and steady. "A word?" Marcus eyed him warily. "Do I know you?" "No, but we have mutual interests," the man replied. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a second folded note and handing it over. "You'll want to read this." Before Marcus could respond, the man stepped aside, disappearing down the aisle. Marcus unfolded the paper, his eyes narrowing as he read. Dio no a this true. Your life depends on at asterisk. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but the edges were still blurred. If the crew couldn't be trusted, who could? And what did they want with him? The answers remained frustratingly out of reach, but one thing was clear. He was being drawn into a game he didn't understand. As Marcus returned to his seat, he found an unexpected visitor waiting for him. The woman from across the aisle. She leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're watching you," she said. "But not for the reasons you think." "Who's watching?" Marcus asked, his tone cautious. "Everyone," she replied, glancing nervously around. "The crew, the passengers, even the captain. They're all part of it." "Part of what?" She hesitated, her hands trembling. "I can't explain here. Just trust no one." She slipped a small object into his hand, a USB drive, before hurrying back to her seat. The drive burned in Marcus's palm like a live wire. What was on it? And why had she risked so much to give it to him? The answers, he realized, would have to wait. For now, all he could do was stay alert and keep playing along. As the flight continued, the tension reached a boiling point. The man with the newspaper confronted the woman, their voices rising just enough for Marcus to catch snippets of the conversation. "You shouldn't have interfered," the man hissed. "Do you have any idea what's at stake?" "Someone has to stop this," she shot back, her voice shaking. "It's gone too far." Their argument ended abruptly when a flight attendant approached, her expression stern. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone icy. "No," the man said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a misunderstanding." The attendant's gaze lingered on the woman, a silent warning passing between them. Then she turned and walked away, leaving an oppressive silence in her wake. Marcus's mind raced. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than he'd imagined, and he was running out of time to figure it out. The breaking point came when Marcus accessed the USB drive using his phone. The files contained surveillance footage, not just of the plane, but of him. Every move he'd made in the past 24 hours had been tracked, from his arrival at the airport to his seat on the plane. The implications were staggering. Why were they watching him? And who was behind it? Before he could process it fully, the intercom crackled to life. "Sergeant Hale," the captain's voice announced, calm yet ominous. "We need to have a word. Please make your way to the cockpit." The shadows thickened as Marcus stood, his heart pounding. Whatever awaited him on the other side of that door, he knew it would change everything. But as he walked down the aisle, one thought burned in his mind. Asterisk, who can I trust? Asterisk. And the answer, he feared, was no one. Marcus stepped into the cockpit, the door closing behind him with an ominous click. The captain, a weathered man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, gestured toward the empty co-pilot's seat. "Take a seat, Sergeant," he said, his tone measured, almost kind. But the kindness was a veil, thin and fragile, stretched over something far more dangerous. Marcus sat, his posture rigid. The hum of the plane's systems filled the silence, an undercurrent to the tension hanging in the air. "What's this about?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, though his pulse thrummed in his ears. The captain turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "You've been asking a lot of questions, Sergeant Hale. I respect that. You're a man who seeks the truth. But let me ask you this. What would you do if the truth wasn't something you could handle?" Marcus didn't flinch. "Try me." The captain's lips twitched into a ghost of a smile. "Fair enough." He reached into a compartment and retrieved a thin folder, sliding it across the console. "Take a look." Inside were documents, photos, and reports that made Marcus's blood run cold. Images of covert operations, casualties, and classified files, all linked to missions he had undertaken during his military career. But there was more. Among the photos were surveillance images of his family, his home, even the diner where he'd had breakfast before heading to the airport. "What is this?" Marcus demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "This," the captain said, gesturing to the folder, "is a record of the lives you've lived. The missions you thought were for the greater good, they weren't. The people you trusted, they betrayed you before you even stepped onto the battlefield." Marcus's mind raced, the weight of the words pressing down on him. "What do you want from me?" The captain leaned back, his gaze piercing. "I want you to understand that this flight isn't just a trip from point A to point B. It's a reckoning. Everyone on this plane has a part to play, including you." The cryptic response only fueled Marcus's frustration, but before he could press further, the cockpit door swung open, and the man in the suit stepped inside, his face dark with urgency. "Captain, we had a situation." The captain rose, his expression grim. "What now?" "It's the woman," the man said, glancing at Marcus. "She's compromised the operation." The captain's jaw tightened. "Handle it. And make sure he stays put," he added, nodding toward Marcus. But Marcus wasn't about to wait around. As the man in the suit turned to leave, Marcus shot to his feet, his training kicking in. With a swift, calculated motion, he disarmed the man, his reflexes honed by years of combat. "I'm done playing your games," Marcus growled, aiming the weapon at the captain. "You're going to tell me what's really going on, or so help me." The captain raised his hands, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "Careful, Sergeant. You might not like what you find." The sound of commotion erupted from the cabin, voices rising in panic. Marcus glanced toward the door, his instincts screaming at him to act. But the captain's voice stopped him cold. "You're not the hero here, Hale. You're the catalyst." "What the hell does that mean?" Marcus demanded. The captain's reply was a whisper, almost drowned out by the chaos beyond the cockpit. "It means you've been the target all along." Marcus's mind reeled as the pieces began to fall into place. The notes, the USB drive, the surveillance, they weren't clues, they were bait. He had been lured into a carefully orchestrated trap, his every move anticipated, his every choice manipulated. Bursting out of the cockpit, Marcus was met with a scene of chaos. The woman who had given him the USB drive was being restrained by two attendants, her cries muffled by the commotion. Passengers looked on in confusion and fear, their whispers feeding the growing tension. Marcus moved quickly, disarming one of the attendants and pulling the woman free. "What's going on?" he demanded. "They're using you," she gasped, her voice frantic. "This isn't just about you. It's about what you know, what you've seen. They need you to stay quiet, to disappear." Before Marcus could respond, the plane jolted violently, the cabin lights flickering. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are experiencing minor turbulence." But Marcus knew better. This was no accident. Gripping the woman's arm, he moved toward the emergency exit, his mind racing. "How did we stop this?" he asked her. "We don't," she said, her voice trembling. "Not unless you're willing to face the truth." "What truth?" She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "That you're not the hero of this story. You're the loose end." The words hit like a blow, but Marcus had no time to process them. The plane jolted again, the cabin tilting as passengers screamed. The truth was closing in, relentless and inescapable. In the final confrontation, Marcus faced the captain once more, this time in the center of the chaotic cabin. Passengers were caught in the crossfire of lies and betrayal, their fear palpable. The captain, calm amid the storm, delivered the final blow. "You think this is about justice, Surgeon? About truth? It's not. It's about control. And you've lost it." As the final piece clicked into place, Marcus laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. The truth had been there all along, but it wasn't the truth he wanted to see. He had been a pawn in a game far larger than himself, his every move orchestrated by unseen hands. In the end, Marcus made his choice, one that would haunt him forever. He pulled the emergency lever, forcing the plane into an emergency descent. As chaos erupted around him, he locked eyes with the captain, a silent challenge passing between them. The plane landed in a remote field, battered but intact. As passengers stumbled out, dazed and shaken, Marcus stayed behind, watching as the woman disappeared into the shadows, taking the USB drive with her. In the aftermath, Marcus was left with nothing but questions, and the haunting realization that some truths are better left buried. As the rain began to fall, sharp and cold against the wreckage, he whispered to himself, was the truth ever worth knowing, or was ignorance the kinder lie? The answer remained elusive, lingering in the cold, shadowed air.